In the last 72 hours, something has been happening in Washington that almost nobody outside a very small circle truly understands. And if you think this is just another round of political theater, another impeachment spectacle designed for cable news shouting matches, then you are missing the most dangerous signal American democracy has sent in generations. This is not noise. This is not drama. This is not business as usual. This is a system under strain, and that strain is showing in the smallest, most terrifying number imaginable. One vote, 218 to 217. That is not a margin. That is not a mandate. That is a warning flare fired straight into the night sky. It is the sound of institutional ice cracking beneath the weight of a divided nation. And once you understand what that number really represents, you will realize why people inside the Capitol are sleeping with their phones on their chests and their contingency plans already drafted. Because this wasn't just a vote. It was the first domino. And here's the part you will not hear on cable news panels or political podcasts. The conversations happening right now are not happening on television. They are happening in hallways without windows, on encrypted phone lines, in closed-door meetings where even senior staff are being asked to leave the room. What I'm about to walk you through is not speculation. It's the internal logic guiding decisions behind the scenes. And by the time we reach the end, you'll understand why even people who voted yes are privately asking themselves whether they just set something in motion that cannot be stopped. 218 to 217. To understand why this number matters, you have to put it in historical context. When Richard Nixon faced impeachment in 1974, support for the process wasn't narrow, it was overwhelming. More than 400 members of Congress were prepared to move forward. The system spoke with a unified voice. When Bill Clinton was impeached in 1998, the vote still wasn't close. 288 to 206, clear lines, clear sides. Even Donald Trump's first impeachment in 2019 produced a decisive margin, 230 to 197. But this time, one vote, a single person separating action from paralysis. That is not unity, that is fracture. Half of Congress believes the country is facing an existential threat. The other half believes the process itself has become the weapon. And those two beliefs don't negotiate, they calcify. Now here's what nobody's saying out loud. 3 Republicans who voted yes have effectively ended their careers inside their own party. They know it. Their staff knows it. Their donors know it. Primary challengers are already being recruited behind the scenes. At the same time, 2 Democrats who voted yes are now viewed as politically radioactive in their districts. Internal polling suggests both are vulnerable in the next election cycle. In other words, everyone paid a price. But the most important detail, the one Washington is actively trying to protect, is the identity of vote number 218. That name is being shielded, not out of courtesy, out of fear. Because since that vote was cast, the pressure has been relentless. Calls from party leadership, calls from billion-dollar donors, and according to multiple sources, contact from individuals connected directly to Donald Trump himself. This is not about courage anymore. This is about survival. And the question now echoing through every office on Capitol Hill is brutally simple. If it took this much political blood to get to 218, what would it take to get to 67? Because the House does not remove presidents. It accuses them. The Senate decides whether they live or die politically. And the math in the Senate is not just difficult, it is almost impossible. 50 Democrats plus 3 independents gives you 53 votes. Conviction requires 67. That means 14 Republican senators would have to break ranks. 14 out of 49, nearly 30% of the caucus turning against its own leader. In modern American politics, that simply does not happen. Not with primary threats looming, not with base loyalty this intense, not with media ecosystems designed to punish dissent instantly. The system is built to prevent exactly this outcome, and yet there are 3 scenarios where the impossible becomes possible. 3, and all 3 are currently in play. The first is what insiders refer to quietly as the smoking gun, not circumstantial evidence, not interpretive arguments, but something undeniable. A recording, a document, a witness with direct knowledge who flips publicly. Think Watergate. When the Nixon tapes emerged, Republican support collapsed almost overnight. Senators who had defended him publicly on Monday were urging resignation by Wednesday. If something of that magnitude surfaces during the Senate process, loyalty becomes a liability. And when loyalty becomes dangerous, survival instincts take over. In that scenario, 67 votes don't trickle in, they avalanche. The second scenario is less dramatic but arguably more powerful. The money stops And this is already happening. 7 of the largest Republican mega donors have quietly frozen contributions. No announcements, no press releases, just silence. The Koch network, one of the most influential funding machines in American politics, has gone completely dark. No defense, no endorsements, no checks. And then there's Peter Thiel, once one of Trump's most enthusiastic backers. Millions poured into Trump-aligned candidates, vocal support, public praise. Every single tweet referencing Trump deleted, scrubbed, erased. When the money dries up, loyalty evaporates, because here's the truth most people never hear. Politicians don't fear voters nearly as much as they fear donors. Voters show up every 2 years. Donors decide whether you can run at all. And if the donor class concludes that Trump is now a long-term liability, that backing him risks a decade of losses, then suddenly 14 Republican senators begin looking a lot less impossible. The third scenario is the one nobody wants to discuss openly, the Pence factor. Mike Pence is the wild card that terrifies both sides. If Pence stands in front of cameras and publicly supports conviction, Senate insiders believe up to 20 Republican senators would follow within 48 hours. That's not speculation, that's internal consensus. Pence carries credibility with evangelicals that Trump never fully secured. He maintains relationships with institutional Republicans Trump alienated years ago. And most importantly, he has nothing left to lose. He's not running again. He has no future inside a Trump-controlled party, which means he is uniquely free to speak without fear of retaliation. And here's the detail that should make you sit up straight. Multiple senators have already asked Pence directly whether he would consider making a public statement. Not an anonymous comment, not a background quote, a full televised address. He has not said no. In fact, multiple sources say a press conference is being actively discussed. Location scouted, security reviewed, timing debated. If Pence steps forward, the entire political equation changes overnight. But even with all 3 scenarios in motion, there is one mechanism that bypasses the Senate entirely, and it is the most dangerous option of all, the 25th Amendment, Section 4. On paper, it sounds procedural, almost boring. The Vice President, with a majority of the cabinet, can declare the President unable to discharge the duties of office. But the consequences are immediate. Not after hearings, not after debate, immediately. Command of the military transfers. The nuclear codes move. Executive authority vanishes. It is America's constitutional ejection button, and it requires no vote from Congress. So why hasn't it been used? Because someone has to go first. Someone has to look the president in the eye and declare him unfit. And in Trump's universe, that isn't just disloyalty, that's betrayal. Betrayal in Trump's world is not just frowned upon, it is punished loudly, publicly, and permanently. Loyalty has always been the central currency of his political universe, valued above competence, legality, or even ideological alignment. The people closest to him understand this better than anyone. These are not distant bureaucrats or neutral technocrats. These are individuals Trump personally elevated, promoted, and defended. Many of their careers exist because he chose them. Their relevance, their access, and their power were granted by proximity to him. Asking these people to invoke Section 4 of the 25th Amendment is not just asking for a constitutional judgment, it is asking them to accept exile. That exile would not be symbolic, it would be total. Trump has a long and well-documented history of retaliating against those he perceives as disloyal. Former allies are not simply ignored, they are destroyed rhetorically, politically, and often professionally. Once someone crosses that line, they become an example. Their names are repeated as warnings, their motives are questioned, their character is smeared. In Trump's ecosystem, betrayal follows you forever. There is no rehabilitation, there is no quiet retirement, there is only banishment. This is why Section 4 exists in a strange state of limbo, widely discussed, legally available, but never touched. Everyone knows it's there, everyone understands what it does, and everyone fears the cost of using it. The amendment was designed as a safeguard against incapacity, but it was never built to withstand a political movement centered around personal loyalty and mass mobilization. On paper, it looks like a solution. In reality, it looks like a career-ending act of rebellion. But even that is not the full story. There is another complication that most people don't realize, and it fundamentally changes the calculus. Trump can fight back. If the vice president and a majority of the cabinet were to declare him unfit under Section 4, that declaration would not be the final word. It would only be the beginning of a larger and more dangerous confrontation. Within 4 days, Trump has the explicit constitutional right to challenge the declaration formally. And when he does, the process moves out of the executive branch and into Congress. That shift matters more than most people understand. Once challenged, Congress must vote on whether to uphold the declaration. And this is not a simple majority vote. It is not 51%. It is not even close. The Constitution requires a two-thirds supermajority in both the House and the Senate to keep the president sidelined. That is an extraordinarily high bar, higher, in fact, than the threshold required to convict a president after impeachment. In practical terms, this means Section 4 is not an easier path than impeachment. It is arguably a harder one. Even if the cabinet were willing to risk their careers and reputations, Trump could immediately force a vote that is even more difficult to win than the one already tearing Congress apart. Lawmakers who hesitate to convict after impeachment under enormous public scrutiny would now be asked to vote again, this time on a question framed not as misconduct, but as incapacity. And Trump would control the narrative every step of the way. He would not frame it as a constitutional safeguard. He would frame it as a coup. He would claim betrayal. He would claim sabotage. He would rally supporters against unelected bureaucrats and traitors from within. The vote would not happen in a vacuum. It would happen under intense political pressure, media chaos, and the threat of primary challenges backed by a mobilized base. Every member of Congress would know that a yes vote could end their career just as decisively as any cabinet members. This is the trap built into the system. Section 4 looks powerful, but it is designed to trigger an even more demanding test of political will. It assumes good faith actors operating without fear of retaliation. It assumes institutional loyalty outweighs personal survival. In Trump's political reality, those assumptions collapse. So the amendment remains where it is, known, feared, untouched. Not because it lacks legal authority, but because invoking it sets off a chain reaction that almost no one believes can be finished successfully. The moment it is triggered, Trump regains the initiative. He turns defense into offense. He forces a vote that demands overwhelming unity in a deeply fractured system. And that is why, despite constant speculation, Section 4 has never moved beyond theory. It is not dormant because it is weak. It is dormant because it is dangerous to those who would try to use it and to the fragile balance of power it would immediately test. And yet, here's the detail that should scare you. 4 cabinet members have quietly retained private attorneys, not White House counsel, not government lawyers, private attorneys, the kind you hire when you're preparing for personal legal exposure. Why would sitting cabinet members need that? And there's more. The Secretary of Defense has reportedly refused calls from certain White House advisors over the last 72 hours, not postponed, not delayed, refused. Staff instructed to screen aggressively. That is not protocol. That is someone creating distance. Something is being prepared, some kind of contingency. But even that isn't the worst case scenario, because all of these mechanisms assume one thing, that Donald Trump accepts the outcome. What happens if he doesn't? What happens if the Senate votes 68 to convict and Trump says no? What happens if he declares the process illegitimate and refuses to leave the White House? That is when the crisis stops being legal and becomes existential. Picture it. The Senate convicts. The Chief Justice announces the result. Kamala Harris is sworn in. Legally, constitutionally, it's over. Then Trump posts a message. I am still your president. This was a coup. I do not recognize it. And he stays. Who enforces the Constitution then? The Secret Service is sworn to protect the president. But who is the president in that moment? The person the Constitution names or the person who refuses to accept reality? At that moment, one man becomes the most important figure in America. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, because whoever he recognizes as commander-in-chief is who the military follows. If he hesitates, even briefly, uncertainty spreads like a virus. Governors begin choosing sides. Texas refuses recognition. Florida follows. Ohio follows. Federal agencies freeze. This isn't a constitutional crisis anymore. It's a legitimacy crisis. And history shows how dangerous those become. In 1876, America nearly fractured after a disputed election, resolved only by abandoning Reconstruction and condemning millions to a century of oppression. In 1933, Germany's constitution didn't vanish, it was ignored. In 2016, Turkey used emergency powers to hollow out democracy from within. In every case, institutions existed on paper but failed in practice, because institutions are only as strong as the people willing to defend them. And when fear outweighs principle, collapse comes faster than anyone expects. That leaves one final variable, the public, 330 million people. And according to internal models, there are three possible responses: passive acceptance, controlled protest, or rupture. The first is exhaustion. People shrug, life goes on, institutions survive, but trust dies. The second is protest, loud, sustained, but contained. The system bends but holds. The third, the rupture. And if you think January 6th was the bottom, you are wrong, because this time everyone knows exactly what's at stake, and that makes all the difference. History is being written right now, and whether we like it or not, we're all part of it, if we still have a country to talk about.